The morning after her wedding, Eliza Ashford received no jewels and no affectionate promise that Ashford Hall would soon feel like home. Instead, her husband placed a heavy ring of household keys in her palm. Sebastian Ashford, Earl of Ashford, stood beside the breakfast table in a dark morning coat. Looking more like a man conducting estate business than a newly married husband. He had been polite throughout the ceremony, courteous at dinner, and distant during the quiet hours that followed. Now his grey eyes settled briefly on the simple gown Eliza had brought from her father's ruined household. My mother employed 3 ladies who believed marriage meant breakfast in bed and bills sent to their husbands, he said. Ashford can afford neither. Eliza looked down at the keys: pantry, linen room, cellars, storerooms. The keys of a housekeeper, not a countess. And what exactly do you expect from your countess? Usefulness. Eliza had heard crueler words from creditors who had emptied her father's warehouse after his business collapsed. She closed her fingers around the keys rather than give Sebastian the satisfaction of seeing the remark wound her. Then I suppose I should begin. By the end of her first week, she understood why Ashford Hall always seemed busy and yet permanently short of money. Flour arrived through a merchant charging nearly twice the village price. Coal was purchased in small loads that increased transport costs. The estate's wool went through an agent who took a hefty commission before selling it to northern mills. While damaged linens were discarded instead of being repaired, and suppliers made wasteful separate deliveries. None of it seemed disastrous on its own. Together, it was slowly bleeding the estate dry. Eliza changed what she was allowed to change. She bought flour directly from the miller, combined deliveries, negotiated a better coal contract, and ordered damaged linens repaired. Within 10 days, household expenses had dropped enough for the steward to mention it over breakfast. Sebastian looked across the table. At least you have found something you are suited for. Eliza continued examining the account book. How fortunate for us both. His gaze lingered on her for a moment, but the steward moved on to tenant rents. Before Sebastian could decide whether she had insulted him. The deeper trouble revealed itself a week later. Sebastian had invited 2 creditors and his solicitor to dinner. Eliza intended to remain quiet until one gentleman complained that Ashford wool was bringing miserable prices because the market had collapsed. The market has not collapsed, Eliza said. The conversation stopped. She continued calmly. Fine long wool has risen since spring. Ashford is receiving poor prices because it is selling through the wrong agent. One creditor raised his eyebrows. Sebastian's expression hardened. Eliza. If you sold directly to the mills in Leeds instead of through Harcourt Brothers, you could avoid their commission, and estate business is not the concern of the household staff. Silence fell around the table. Eliza did not move. One of the creditors glanced at the ring of keys hanging from her waist before hiding a smile behind his wineglass. Sebastian seemed to understand what he had just done. For a moment, something almost like regret passed across his face, but pride kept him from correcting himself. Eliza folded her napkin neatly. Of course, my lord. She left before dessert. Later that night, while reviewing unpaid invoices, she found a notice folded between 2 older bills. A London bank intended to sell several Ashford debts to outside investors within the month. Eliza read the document twice. Then she went to Sebastian's study. Before she could knock, his voice carried through the partly open door. I need time, he was telling his solicitor. If those notes are sold, I may lose the northern farms first, then the mill. And Lady Ashford. My wife knows nothing of finance. Leave her out of this. Eliza remained motionless in the corridor. For 10 years, she had worked beside her father in warehouses and counting rooms. She knew the price of wool in Leeds, York, and London. She knew how merchants negotiated credit, how frightened lenders behaved. And how a debt worth £1 could sometimes be purchased for considerably less when its owner needed money immediately. Sebastian knew none of that. Because Sebastian had never asked. Eliza returned to her room and opened the bottom drawer of her writing desk. From beneath several folded gowns, she removed a narrow wooden box she had brought from her father's house. Inside were old business correspondence, the remaining balance of a trading account, and several letters from merchants who still remembered the name Mercer. The money was not enough to save Ashford. Not yet. She only needed enough to begin. She pulled a sheet of paper toward her and started writing. 3 mornings later, Sebastian's solicitor received an unexpected offer for the first Ashford debt scheduled for sale. The buyer was a small trading company Sebastian had never heard of, Mercer Vale Trading. And while the Earl of Ashford stared at the unfamiliar name, wondering who had begun buying pieces of his family estate, his wife was downstairs calculating the price of wool. Within a fortnight, Sebastian had heard the name Mercer Vale often enough to dislike it. The company had purchased the note attached to Ashford's northern grazing fields, then acquired a second debt secured against the old wool mill near the river. Neither transaction was large enough to threaten the estate by itself, but together they formed a pattern Sebastian could not ignore. Someone was buying the weakest pieces of Ashford before he could recover them. He spent hours with his solicitor tracing signatures, bank references, and correspondence only to discover that Mercer Vale Trading operated through a modest London office and dealt primarily in wool textiles and agricultural goods. The company was legitimate, profitable, and frustratingly difficult to link to any individual investor. "They have made no demand for payment," Sebastian said one evening. His solicitor adjusted his spectacles. "Not yet. That is what concerns me." From the opposite side of the breakfast room, Eliza continued reading a supplier's invoice. Sebastian glanced toward her. "Someone is buying my family piece by piece." Eliza looked up. "Have they removed any tenants?" "No." "Raised rents?" "No." "Closed the mill?" "Not so far." "Then perhaps they do not intend to destroy Ashford." Sebastian's jaw tightened. "That is not the point." Eliza lowered her eyes to the paper again. She knew perfectly well that it was the point. Mercer Vale had not been created to strip Ashford. It existed to keep strangers from doing exactly that. Yet keeping the company alive was proving considerably more difficult than buying the first note. The money left from her father's old trading account had almost disappeared. If she wanted to purchase more of Ashford's debt, she needed profit. Fortunately, Ashford possessed one thing far more valuable than Sebastian seemed to realize: wool. 4 years, the estate had sold its entire clip through Harcourt Brothers, whose agents collected the wool, graded it carelessly, and passed it to northern mills after taking a commission large enough to make Eliza wince. She began quietly. First, she asked the shepherds to separate the finest long wool from the coarse fleece instead of selling everything together. Then she wrote to 2 mill owners who had once purchased from her father, offering smaller direct shipments at a price better for Ashford and still cheaper for the mills. Both accepted. Within 3 weeks, Mercer Vale was not merely moving Ashford wool. Eliza had arranged to combine shipments from 3 neighboring farms, earning a commission for managing the sale. The first profit was modest. The second was not. Sebastian noticed the change before he understood it. The wool sheds were busier. Carts left the estate more regularly. Several women from the village had been hired to sort, wash, and prepare fleece before shipment, work that allowed them to earn wages without leaving their families for the factories. One afternoon, Sebastian stopped beside the yard and watched Eliza speak with an elderly shepherd. The man removed his cap. "My daughter thanks you, my lady. She has work now because of the sorting room." Eliza smiled. "Your daughter earned her position." "I merely noticed she was good at it." Later, Sebastian found her in the estate office examining a delivery schedule. "How did you know the wool could be sold this way?" Eliza did not look up immediately. "My father was a wool merchant. I know that." "No," she said quietly. "You know he went bankrupt." That silenced him. Eliza closed the ledger. "I worked beside him for almost 10 years. I negotiated with mills. I checked weights. I watched prices. I learned which merchants paid their debts and which ones smiled while postponing them." Sebastian stared at her as though information that had always existed had suddenly become visible. "Why did you never tell me?" Eliza finally met his eyes. "You never asked." He had no answer. After that, something subtle began to change. At dinner, Sebastian started asking what she thought before approving household purchases. Once, when the steward proposed selling 2 old carriage horses to reduce costs, Sebastian turned to Eliza first. Your opinion? She was almost amused by the unfamiliar words. Keep them until spring. Selling now will bring half their value. He followed her advice. The following week, he asked her to join him while reviewing tenant rents. Their marriage was still far from tender, but the distance between them had begun to narrow through small things neither acknowledged aloud. Sebastian discovered that Eliza preferred strong tea and hated overly sweet preserves. She learned that he remained awake whenever accounts did not balance and that he rubbed the bridge of his nose when worried. Even though he insisted he was merely tired. One evening, after they had spent almost 2 hours reviewing farm expenses, Sebastian looked at her across the scattered papers. You should have been doing this from the beginning. Eliza's expression barely changed. Yes. The single word carried enough truth to make him look away. But whatever trust was beginning to form between them soon collided with a larger problem. A creditor in London demanded immediate settlement of a substantial loan taken by Sebastian's father years earlier. The debt was secured against Ashford Hall itself. Sebastian had expected another 6 months. He was given 30 days. The estate did not have the money. For the first time, the possibility he had refused to name became real. Ashford Hall could be sold. Sebastian travelled to his solicitor's office expecting to negotiate an extension, but the older man met him with an expression Sebastian could not read. The situation has changed. How? The bank no longer holds the mortgage. Sebastian froze. Who does? The solicitor hesitated. Mercer Vale Trading. Sebastian's anger arrived faster than fear. They bought the hall. They bought the debt secured against it. Then find whoever controls that company. We have attempted to. Attempt harder. Sebastian stood, his chair scraping against the floor. Send word that I want their representative at Ashford. I will not allow some faceless merchant to decide whether my family keeps its home. By evening, the invitation had been sent. Across the house, Eliza read a copy of it in silence. Sebastian had finally demanded to meet the person behind Mercer Vale. She folded the paper carefully and placed it beside her ledger. There was no reason to hide any longer. When the creditors gathered at Ashford Hall, Sebastian would discover that the stranger he feared had been sitting across from him at dinner every night. The meeting began at 11 the following morning in the long dining room. The same room where Sebastian had once told Eliza that estate business was not the concern of the household staff. He had chosen it because the study was too small for the number of men expected to attend. 2 bank representatives had arrived from London along with 3 creditors, Sebastian's solicitor, the steward, and an older gentleman who handled several of the estate's legal agreements. Eliza entered last. She wore a dark blue gown with no jewelry beyond her wedding ring, and the familiar household keys still hung at her waist. Sebastian noticed them immediately. For the first time, they embarrassed him. Not because they made Eliza look like a servant, but because he remembered exactly who had put them in her hand. He pulled out the chair beside his own. Eliza. She looked at the chair, then at him. Several weeks earlier, she would have stood behind the table unless invited to sit. Today, she took the seat without hesitation. Sebastian waited until everyone had settled before turning to his solicitor. Where is the representative of Mercer Vale? The solicitor glanced toward Eliza. She is already here. Sebastian frowned. No one from the company has arrived. The solicitor opened a leather portfolio and placed several documents on the table. My lord, Lady Ashford is the principal partner of Mercer Vale Trading. For several seconds, Sebastian simply stared at him. Then his eyes moved slowly toward his wife. Eliza. She did not look away. Yes. One of the creditors shifted in his chair. Another leaned forward to examine the documents as though the answer might somehow change if he read them closely enough. Sebastian's voice dropped. You own Mercer Vale. I control it. And the northern notes. Mercer Vale purchased them. The mill. Yes. The grazing lands. Yes. He stopped. There was one question left, and judging by his face, he already knew the answer. Ashford Hall. Eliza folded her hands on the table. I purchased the mortgage secured against it 3 days ago. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument could have been. Sebastian looked toward his solicitor. Is this true? It is. And legally. Entirely. The solicitor pushed the documents toward him. Lady Ashford now controls the largest portion of outstanding debt against the estate. Sebastian lowered himself into his chair. For months, he had imagined Mercer Vale as some ambitious merchant waiting beyond Ashford's gates, buying his family piece by piece until there was nothing left to defend. The person he had feared was the woman sitting beside him. The woman he had told knew nothing of finance. One of the creditors cleared his throat. Then perhaps we should discuss Lady Ashford's intentions. Sebastian turned sharply toward Eliza. Yes. His expression was difficult to read now, pride fighting with humiliation and something deeper that looked very much like fear. What are your intentions? Eliza opened the ledger she had brought with her. To keep Ashford intact. The answer clearly surprised him. She continued before anyone could interrupt. The debts were being sold below their original value because several lenders wanted immediate repayment. Mercer Vale purchased them before speculators could. Had they fallen into other hands, the northern farms would already have been separated from the estate. She turned several pages. The wool mill remains profitable. The grazing fields remain productive. Tenant rents are recovering. Ashford is not worthless, Sebastian. It is badly managed and heavily indebted. Those are not the same thing. The words were calm, but they struck harder because she made no attempt to humiliate him. Sebastian looked down at the figures. How did you pay for all of this? I did not have enough money at first. You were right about that. He flinched slightly. I used what remained in my father's trading account to purchase the first note. Then Mercer Vale sold Ashford wool directly to northern mills and began handling shipments for neighboring farms. The profits purchased the next debt and then the next. One of the bankers examined the accounts. These returns are unusually strong. We stopped paying 3 men to move the same bale of wool. A brief smile appeared on the older solicitor's face. Sebastian did not smile. He was staring at the ledger as though every page contained another memory of something he should have seen. You did this while managing my household. Our household, Eliza corrected quietly. His eyes lifted. The correction landed. Sebastian drew a slow breath. If you now hold the principal mortgage, you could demand payment. Yes. And if Ashford cannot pay, I could force a sale. The room became very still. Sebastian's face hardened, instinctively preparing himself for whatever price she intended to name. Eliza closed the ledger. I have no intention of selling Ashford Hall. Relief moved across his expression, but she was not finished. There will be conditions. Sebastian nodded once. Name them. No tenant will be evicted simply to create a quick payment for creditors. The wool mill will remain open as long as it remains profitable. Every estate account will be independently reviewed twice a year. She paused. Any sale of land, new debt, or major contract will require 2 signatures. Sebastian understood immediately. Eliza looked directly at him. I will have a permanent seat on the estate council. The memory returned to both of them at once. The dinner, the wineglass lifted to hide a smile. Sebastian telling his own wife that estate business was not the concern of household staff. He swallowed. Anything else? Eliza's voice remained steady. No. Sebastian looked genuinely confused. You control enough debt to take Ashford from me, and that is all you want. For the first time that morning, something wounded entered her expression. I never wanted Ashford from you. Then what did you want? Eliza held his gaze. A seat at the table where you once told me I did not belong. No one moved. Sebastian looked around the room. Every man present had heard what she said, and several had been present on the night he humiliated her. His pride had shielded him for most of his life. This time, he let it go. My wife did not save Ashford because I allowed her to. Eliza's eyes widened slightly. Sebastian continued, she saved it while I was too proud to listen to her. He turned toward the creditors. I mistook her lack of title and fortune for a lack of ability. That mistake nearly cost this family more than money. Then he stood, placed his hand on the empty chair immediately beside his own, and pulled it fully toward. Eliza looked at him for a long moment. She did not forgive him. Not yet. But when the next document was placed before them, Sebastian did not reach for the pen first. He passed it to her. Ashford did not recover overnight. 4 months, Eliza and Sebastian worked through debts that had taken years to accumulate, renegotiating interest, consolidating contracts, and selling only what the estate could afford to lose. The difference was that Eliza no longer worked from the margins of household ledgers while Sebastian made decisions behind a closed study door. Her chair remained beside his at every estate meeting, and when merchants arrived expecting to negotiate only with the Earl, Sebastian directed their questions toward his wife as naturally as if he had always done so. At first, the change embarrassed him. Not because Eliza was more capable than he was in certain matters, but because every time she identified an opportunity he had overlooked. He remembered how confidently he had once told her that estate business did not concern her. Eliza never reminded him. That somehow made it worse. One afternoon while they were reviewing the accounts from the wool mill, Sebastian pushed a contract toward her. "The Leeds buyers have accepted your price." Eliza read the figures. "Our price?" He almost smiled. "I am learning." "You are." The softness in her voice lasted only a moment, but Sebastian heard it. Mercer Vale continued to grow. Neighboring landowners who once viewed Eliza as the bankrupt merchant's daughter began asking her to arrange their wool shipments. And the sorting rooms near Ashford Mill expanded enough to employ more women from the surrounding villages. The profits could have made Eliza wealthy. Instead, she used them to do something Sebastian had not expected. She created a legal trust. The northern farms, the mill, and the principal mortgage on Ashford Hall would eventually be transferred into it, with strict conditions preventing any future Earl or Countess from gambling away the estate through reckless borrowing. Sebastian discovered the documents when the solicitor arrived for his signature. He read them twice. "You are giving up control. I am limiting it. You could have kept the mortgage in your own name. I could have. After the way I treated you, no one would blame you." Eliza closed the file. "I did not spend months saving Ashford so that it could merely belong to a different person." Sebastian looked at her. "Then why?" "Because land like this is never only a house and a title. There are families on those farms who have lived there longer than either of us has been alive. There are people in that mill whose children eat because it remains open." She rested one hand on the documents. "I never wanted to own your home, Sebastian. I wanted you to stop believing ownership made you the only person entitled to decide its future." He absorbed that quietly. Months earlier he might have defended himself. Now he simply nodded. "You were right." Eliza gave him a faint, almost suspicious smile. "You say that more often these days." "I was wrong rather frequently." That time she laughed. It was the first easy laughter between them since their wedding. The change in their marriage came slowly after that. Sebastian stopped trying to compensate for his failures with grand gestures. Because Eliza had no interest in jewels bought with money Ashford did not need to spend. Instead, he asked what she thought before signing contracts. He introduced her to visiting merchants as the woman who had reorganized the estate's trade. When newspapers credited him with saving Ashford, he wrote back and corrected them. Most importantly, he stopped assuming gratitude entitled him to forgiveness. One evening he found Eliza in the old household office, removing the heavy ring of keys she had carried since the morning after their wedding. She placed them on the desk. Sebastian looked down at them. "Are you finished with those?" "I think Mrs. Bell can manage the linen cupboards without a countess supervising her." He picked up the keys, remembering the cold confidence with which he had once dropped them into Eliza's. "I owe you an apology for these." "You owe me several. I have made a list." Eliza's mouth curved. Sebastian reached into his coat and removed a single brass key. She raised an eyebrow. "What is that?" "The estate council room." She looked at him, then at the key. "I already attend the meetings." "Yes, but until now you have had to ask someone to unlock the door." He placed it in her palm. "I should have given you this one first." For a moment, Eliza said nothing. Then her fingers closed around it. 1 year after their wedding, Ashford held its autumn gathering beneath clear October skies. The mill was profitable, tenant debts had fallen, and not one family had been removed from their land to satisfy a creditor. A visiting merchant stood beside Sebastian, watching Eliza speak with several farmers near the terrace. "You have made remarkable changes here, my lord," he said. "Who manages the estate now?" There had been a time when Sebastian would have answered without thinking, "I do." Instead, he looked across the lawn at his wife. "We do." That evening, after the guests had gone, Sebastian found Eliza walking through the long dining room. The creditor's table had been replaced months earlier by a smaller council arrangement. 2 chairs stood side by side at its head. Sebastian joined her. "May I ask you something?" "That depends. Do you regret marrying me?" Eliza considered him for so long that he began to look genuinely concerned. "Frequently." Sebastian laughed despite himself. Then she slipped her hand into his. "But not today." He looked down at their joined hands. When Sebastian had married Eliza, he believed he had given a ruined merchant's daughter a home. It had taken nearly losing everything to understand the truth. She had not needed him to give her one. She had taught him how to deserve sharing it.